It's January 30th, 2026, and right now, at exactly 10:17 a.m., New Yorkers everywhere need to pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you could literally change lives in an instant. Imagine waking up today, going about your normal routine, and making one small mistake that could land you in prison for 15 years. It sounds terrifying, but this is the reality under New York's strict gun laws as of this moment. And the shocking truth is, most residents don't even realize how close they are to serious trouble, all because of what they say, or fail to say, when interacting with law enforcement. Today, I'm going to break down everything you need to know, step by step, and reveal the 4 words that a lawyer says could save your life if you ever find yourself in one of these situations. New York's gun laws have always been among the toughest in the country, but recent updates and stricter enforcement have made them even more dangerous for ordinary residents. This isn't about targeting criminals. It's about how the law interprets your words, your actions, and even your hesitation. Many people believe that if they follow basic rules or carry permits, they are completely safe. Unfortunately, that assumption could not be further from the truth. Police officers are trained to notice subtle cues, and the law treats certain responses as potential violations. That means one wrong answer to a simple question could escalate a routine encounter into a legal nightmare. Consider a scenario that happens more often than anyone realizes. You're driving to work, it's a regular weekday morning, and you notice flashing lights in your rearview mirror. A police officer approaches and asks the standard question, "Can I search your vehicle?" You've probably heard countless tips online about your rights, but the reality is that most of that advice is incomplete or misleading. Saying the wrong thing, hesitating too long, or even over-explaining could give them grounds to escalate the situation. Lawyers who specialize in these cases report that verbal missteps are the leading cause of arrests in situations that could have been resolved safely. Now, imagine the stakes. A 15-year prison sentence is not a hypothetical scenario. It's the maximum penalty under New York law for certain gun-related violations, including obstruction, possession, or improper response during a police interaction. Many residents assume that only violent offenders face serious sentences, but this is not true. Even a first-time mistake, like miscommunicating during a traffic stop or giving an unintentional admission, can trigger investigations that could last months or even years. That's why these 4 words, carefully recommended by experienced lawyers, are crucial. They serve as a protective shield that respects the law while safeguarding your freedom. These 4 words are simple, yet incredibly powerful. They are not meant to confuse or mislead law enforcement, nor are they a way to avoid responsibility. Instead, they create a clear legal boundary, prevent misinterpretation, and immediately reduce your risk of self-incrimination. Think of them as a safety net. When a lawyer advises a client to use these words, it's because they have seen countless cases where failure to do so led to long legal battles, hefty fines, or even prison time. These words are about survival, not confrontation, and they work because they are legally sound and strategically effective. It's also important to understand how easily situations can spiral out of control. People often underestimate how quickly a routine traffic stop can become serious. Something as simple as forgetting a permit, misunderstanding a question, or reacting emotionally could be interpreted as obstruction or intent to commit a crime. That's why preparation is so vital. Being aware of the law, knowing your rights, and having the proper words ready can literally prevent a minor encounter from turning into a life-changing problem. Imagine a typical day in New York. You're stopped by police during your commute. They ask if they can search your vehicle. Many people panic and say things like, "Go ahead, I have nothing to hide," or "Sure, check it." These responses seem harmless, but in the eyes of the law, they could be considered consent or even admission, depending on the situation. Lawyers have repeatedly warned that over-explaining, hesitating, or using casual language can create legal vulnerability. By contrast, the 4 words I'm about to reveal act as a legal safeguard. maintaining respect for authority while protecting your rights. Now let's break down why these 4 words are so important. They prevent miscommunication, immediately assert your rights, and signal to law enforcement that you understand the legal boundaries. It's not about arguing or being difficult. It's about staying safe and avoiding a legal trap that many unsuspecting residents fall into every day. These words have been tested repeatedly in real cases, and their effectiveness is backed by legal precedent. This isn't advice pulled from forums or speculation. This is practical, professional guidance used by lawyers to protect clients from extreme consequences. Many people wonder if the risk of a 15-year sentence is real or exaggerated. The truth is, this is not hyperbole. New York's laws are strict, and law enforcement has a zero-tolerance approach when it comes to missteps during encounters involving firearms. People who have never been in trouble with the law before can suddenly find themselves facing charges because of a single verbal mistake. That's why knowledge, preparation, and the right phrasing are critical. These 4 words are not just a tip, they are a life-saving strategy. Let's put it into perspective. If you are pulled over and the officer begins asking questions, your response sets the tone for the entire interaction. A calm, legally informed answer can prevent escalation. A poorly chosen word can trigger suspicion, prolong the encounter, and even lead to arrest. Lawyers consistently emphasize that phrasing matters just as much as behavior. It's not enough to know your rights. You have to communicate them effectively. That's the core reason why these 4 words are so powerful. It's also vital to remember that these rules apply to everyone in New York, regardless of your history or experience with firearms. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. First-time gun owners, experienced permit holders, and long-term residents alike are all vulnerable if they don't know how to respond correctly during police interactions. One mistake can trigger a cascade of legal consequences, including investigations, arrests, and charges that carry decades-long sentences. Using these 4 words ensures that you remain protected in any encounter, no matter how routine it may seem. Understanding the potential consequences is crucial. Many people assume that minor errors or small miscommunications are harmless. Unfortunately, the legal system treats words very seriously. Even statements intended to show honesty, such as explaining yourself too thoroughly or agreeing to a search, can be interpreted as consent or admission. That's where these 4 words make all the difference. They act as a preventive measure, keeping interactions neutral and legally safe. Lawyers have repeatedly stressed that these words are not just a phrase, they are a critical tool for legal protection. Think about the impact on your life if you don't follow this advice. People have lost jobs, faced enormous fines, and spent years in court simply because they said the wrong thing at the wrong time. These are real cases, not stories. In New York, the law doesn't forgive ignorance, and courts do not consider a first-time verbal mistake a valid excuse. That's why preparation, understanding, and the proper phrasing are essential. These 4 words are your first line of defense, a shield against misinterpretation and legal consequences. The urgency cannot be overstated. Every New Yorker who owns a gun or even someone who might encounter law enforcement in connection with firearms needs to understand this immediately. The law is strict, enforcement is active, and mistakes happen faster than most people realize. Being proactive, learning the correct words, and using them when necessary is not optional. It's essential. Think of it as an investment in your freedom, your safety, and your peace of mind. A single moment of hesitation or miscommunication could change your life forever. Let's be clear, this is not fear-mongering, it's reality. Lawyers who handle firearm cases daily report that most arrests and severe penalties arise from verbal missteps rather than criminal intent. That's why these 4 words are so important. They provide a legal boundary that protects you, even if you are completely innocent. They allow you to assert your rights respectfully while avoiding unnecessary conflict or escalation. This is about being smart, prepared, and aware, not about confrontation. Now, Consider the bigger picture. These laws affect thousands of residents every year. They apply to routine traffic stops, interactions at checkpoints, or any situation where law enforcement might question you about firearms. Many people assume that as long as they are law-abiding, they are safe. Unfortunately, that assumption is dangerous. Miscommunication, hesitation, or poorly chosen words can trigger investigations that may lead to charges and lengthy prison sentences. Using these 4 words prevents these situations, giving you control over what could otherwise be unpredictable and risky encounters. The stakes are high, but the solution is simple. By learning the correct words, practicing them mentally, and understanding the context for their use, you dramatically reduce your risk of legal trouble. These words serve as a legal buffer, maintaining neutrality, asserting your rights, and preventing misinterpretation. Lawyers recommend them not because they are complicated or difficult to remember, but because they are effective, tested, and backed by legal precedent. In high-stakes situations, having a simple, proven strategy is far more powerful than relying on guesswork or outdated advice. Every resident of New York should take this seriously. The 15-year maximum sentence is real, and the consequences of mistakes are life-altering. Ignoring these precautions is risky, and relying on assumptions about your rights can be dangerous. By being prepared, understanding your rights, and using these 4 words, you place yourself in a position of strength, safety, and legal protection. This is not optional advice. It's essential for anyone who values their freedom and their future. In conclusion, a single mistake in New York could have catastrophic consequences. The 4 words recommended by experienced lawyers give you a practical, actionable way to protect yourself and prevent a routine encounter from turning into a lifelong legal problem. These words are not just advice, they are a shield, a safeguard, and a tool to help you navigate complex interactions with law enforcement safely. Take this seriously, prepare yourself, and never underestimate the power of a few carefully chosen words. Your freedom, your future, and your life could depend on them. The reason this conversation matters so much right now is because enforcement patterns in New York are not static. They evolve quietly, often without public attention, and by the time most people realize something has changed, it is already too late. Over the past few years, enforcement has become more procedural, more documentation-driven, and far less forgiving of ambiguity. Officers are trained to ask questions in ways that feel casual but are legally significant. This is not speculation. It is confirmed repeatedly in court records and attorney interviews. People don't get into trouble because they intended to break the law. They get into trouble because they didn't understand how the law interprets their responses. That gap between intention and interpretation is where lives are quietly derailed. One of the most dangerous assumptions people make is believing that silence looks suspicious and talking looks cooperative. In reality, excessive talking is one of the most common reasons situations escalate. Courts do not reward friendliness or honesty when it comes at the expense of legal boundaries. Words spoken in stress-filled moments are dissected later in calm courtrooms, where tone, intention, and context are stripped away. What remains is a transcript. That transcript does not care how nervous you were, how polite you meant to be, or how harmless you thought the situation was. It only reflects what you said. This is why lawyers emphasize controlled responses instead of emotional or conversational ones. Trust in law enforcement and trust in the legal system are 2 different things, and understanding that distinction is essential. Respecting an officer does not require you to surrender your legal protections. The law itself provides boundaries for a reason, and invoking those boundaries respectfully is not an act of guilt. Unfortunately, many people fear that asserting their rights will make them look suspicious. The irony is that not asserting them often creates far greater risk. Legal systems are built on procedure, not impressions, and procedure favors those who understand it. Another misconception that needs to be addressed is the idea that only people actively carrying a firearm are at risk. This is simply untrue. Legal exposure can arise from past ownership, transport issues, misunderstandings about storage, or statements made during unrelated stops. Even mentioning firearms casually during questioning can shift the direction of an encounter. This is why lawyers advise minimizing discussion altogether. The fewer variables you introduce, the fewer interpretations can be made later. Consider how quickly memory fades after a stressful event. Most people cannot accurately recall their exact words hours later, let alone months later in court. Officers, however, document interactions professionally and immediately. That imbalance alone should make anyone cautious. The law favors clarity and restraint, not spontaneity. When people say they were just trying to be helpful, lawyers often translate that into unintentionally provided usable evidence. That is not an exaggeration, it is a documented pattern. This is also why so much misinformation spreads online. People share anecdotes that worked for them once, in one situation, under specific circumstances, and present them as universal solutions. The law does not operate that way. What protected one person may expose another. Legal safety does not come from cleverness or improvisation. It comes from consistency. That consistency is exactly why those 4 words matter so much. They are not situational advice. They are structured, neutral, and legally stable across scenarios. Subscriber trust grows when viewers feel informed rather than manipulated, and that is important to acknowledge openly. Fear alone may attract clicks, but credibility retains audiences. Real trust is built by explaining why risks exist, not just that they exist. New York law does not punish confusion, but it does punish outcomes, and outcomes are shaped by language. That is the uncomfortable truth many people do not hear until after they need it. By explaining this now, before a crisis happens, you shift viewers from reactive thinking to preventive thinking. Another element that rarely gets discussed is how fatigue, stress, and routine play into mistakes. Most encounters happen when people are tired, distracted, or rushing. No one prepares mentally for a legal interaction on an ordinary day. That is precisely why preparation must happen in advance. You cannot rely on clarity of thought during pressure, you rely on habit. Having a pre-learned, lawyer-approved response removes guesswork from moments when judgment is compromised. Legal systems are not emotional, but people are. The mismatch between those two realities is where most problems begin. People feel offended, rushed, embarrassed, or anxious, and those emotions leak into speech. Courts do not evaluate emotion, they evaluate statements. Understanding that difference is one of the most important shifts a person can make. The moment you realize that calm, minimal responses are not weakness, but protection, your entire approach changes. It is also worth addressing the idea that, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. This phrase is comforting but dangerously misleading. Legal trouble does not require wrongdoing. It requires exposure. Exposure happens through misinterpretation, incomplete information, or procedural errors. Innocence does not immunize you from consequences. Awareness reduces risk far more effectively than good intentions ever will. People often ask why lawyers sound repetitive when giving advice. The answer is simple: repetition works. Legal protection comes from predictable behavior. Lawyers want responses that do not vary with mood, situation, or pressure. That is why the same guidance appears again and again across cases. It is not because the law is simple, but because safety within it depends on simplicity. The 4 words recommended by lawyers are designed to be remembered under stress, applied universally, and defended easily in court if necessary. Trust is also built by acknowledging limits. No advice guarantees immunity, and no phrase makes someone untouchable. What these words do is dramatically reduce risk. They shift interactions back into procedural territory, where rights are clearer and assumptions are fewer. That shift alone can be the difference between a brief interaction and a life-altering process. Lawyers do not promise miracles. They promise risk reduction. That distinction matters. There is also a cultural element at play. In many communities, politeness and cooperation are deeply ingrained values. Saying no feels rude. Setting boundaries feels confrontational. But the law does not operate on social norms. It operates on rights and procedures. Learning to separate politeness from vulnerability is difficult but necessary. Respect can coexist with boundaries, and boundaries do not imply hostility. They imply awareness. The long-term consequences of not understanding this reality are severe. Legal records do not disappear easily. Charges, even when dismissed, leave trails. Employment, housing, and travel can all be affected by interactions that seemed minor at the time. This is why preventive knowledge is so valuable. Once damage is done, options narrow quickly. Before damage occurs, options are wide. It is also important to emphasize that this is not advice aimed at encouraging conflict or avoidance of responsibility. It is advice aimed at ensuring fairness. The legal system assumes imbalance of power and provides rights to correct it. Using those rights is not abuse. It is participation in the system as designed. People who understand this are not less cooperative, they are more protected. Audience trust grows when viewers feel respected, not talked down to. That is why this information is presented calmly, factually, and without exaggeration. The reality is serious enough without embellishment. The law is unforgiving by design, not by emotion. Understanding that removes fear and replaces it with clarity. Clarity leads to confidence, and confidence leads to better outcomes. Another often overlooked factor is how secondary questions arise. An initial question may seem harmless, but answers create openings for follow-up questions. Each follow-up increases complexity and risk. Controlled responses limit the chain reaction. This is basic risk management, not defiance. Lawyers think in terms of minimizing exposure, not winning arguments on the roadside. People also underestimate how quickly ordinary situations become permanent records. Body cameras, written reports, audio recordings, and digital logs preserve interactions indefinitely. What feels temporary to you is permanent to the system. That asymmetry alone should encourage caution. Speaking less is not secrecy, it is self-preservation. As awareness grows, subscriber communities become more engaged because they feel empowered rather than alarmed. Empowerment comes from understanding mechanisms, not just outcomes. Explaining why words matter more than intentions transforms viewers from passive consumers into informed participants. That transformation builds long-term trust, not just short-term attention. This is also why timing matters. Learning this information after an incident is painful. Learning it beforehand is liberating. Preparation removes fear because it replaces uncertainty with structure. When people know what to expect and how to respond, situations lose their power to overwhelm. That psychological shift alone can prevent mistakes. The law rewards predictability. Systems function best when inputs are controlled. Lawyers aim to make their clients predictable in the safest possible way. Those 4 words are not clever, they are boring by design. Boring is safe. Boring does not escalate. Boring does not create ambiguity. In legal contexts, boring is powerful. It is also worth acknowledging that laws can change, interpretations can evolve, and enforcement priorities can shift. What remains constant is the principle of self-protection through minimal, structured communication. That principle survives changes in policy because it aligns with constitutional foundations. Rights are not trends, they are frameworks. As this conversation continues to reach more people, its value multiplies. One informed person influences families, friends, and communities. Knowledge spreads quietly but effectively. That ripple effect is how trust grows organically. People share what protects them, not what scares them. That distinction matters for long-term credibility. Ultimately, the goal is not to live in fear of the law, but to live in understanding of it. Fear paralyzes. Understanding empowers. When viewers feel that shift, they return, they subscribe, and they engage because they feel respected and protected. That is how real audience loyalty is built. Every sentence in this discussion serves one purpose: reducing the chance that a normal day turns into a permanent problem. That purpose does not require drama, it requires clarity. Clarity builds confidence, confidence builds safety, and safety builds trust. Those are the foundations that matter most. The reality is simple, even if the law is not. One mistake can change everything. Preparation can prevent that mistake. Words matter more than people realize, and choosing them carefully is not paranoia, it is wisdom. When people internalize that truth, they are no longer vulnerable to surprise. They are prepared, calm, and protected.